Welcome to the Perrysburg Podcast, episode 40. I'm your host and Perrysburg resident, Kim Newlove. If you are new to this podcast, welcome. The Perrysburg Podcast is an informational podcast for prospective, new, and current Perrysburg, Ohio residents. We talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. Today's episode is an interview with Pastor Dan Gildner from Grace Church, Perrysburg. Grace Church is located at 601 East Boundary Street, Perrysburg, Ohio. It is right next to Woodlands Park. Places of worship are important to Perrysburg residents. This episode continues a series of interviews with faith community leaders here in Perrysburg. To hear the other episodes in this series, check out episodes 30 and 34. Episode 30 introduced the topic and the series. Then episode 34 was the first interview in the series. That interview was with Pastor Mark Wentz from Lutheran Church of the Master. I'll put a link to both of those episodes in the show notes, which you can find at perrysburgpodcast.com. I'm taking nominations for the next interviews in this series, so to nominate a future guest or yourself, either message me through the website, which is perrysburgpodcast.com, or email me. My email address is kim@perrysburgpodcast.com. I'd like to give you a little bit of background before I share this interview. I got to know Dan Gildner and his wife Erin as parents when my younger son Derek was in junior high and high school. During our conversation today, I got to know Dan Gildner as Pastor Dan, and I really enjoyed our time together. We talked about what inspired him to become a pastor, advice for young people interested in becoming a pastor, how he became equipped for his role as the senior pastor at Grace Church, and just for fun, a certain karaoke song that he sang once upon a time. On a more serious note, we also talked about Grace Church and the worship services, the Bible studies, and the other groups that meet at the church during the week, including one group that really fills the parking lot up on a Thursday morning. We talked about Grace Church's preschool, the vacation Bible school, youth group, mission trips, the group of pastors that Dan belongs to right here in Perrysburg, and what makes Grace Church a good church home for prospective, new, and current Perrysburg, Ohio residents. As a bonus, we end with his favorite things about being a pastor and some of the challenges that he faces as well. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Pastor Dan Gildner. Hi, Pastor Dan. Welcome to the Perrysburg Podcast.
Hello. Good to be with you today.
Great to have you on the show today. I love talking to pastors. It's something that's always been easy for me, and it's especially easy to talk to you because you're Caleb's dad.
I am. That's the greatest honor. Caleb, Silas, and Elena's dad. But in your case, we got to know each other through two of our kids, Caleb in particular.
Absolutely. My son Derek and your son Caleb have been friends for a number of years, been through cross country together. So I've gotten to know you and your wife Erin as parents, and it's been fun. But today we get to talk about you and Grace Church Perrysburg. I want to start with, how did you get to become a pastor? What led you to being a pastor?
I came in through interesting ways. I was actually, before I was even following God, I was coaching football at a junior high school. And I'll never forget this moment. I was a college student at the time. And at the end of a practice, one of my 8th grade boys came into my coach's office. And he told me how excited he was because he was going to be a father at age 13. I didn't know what to do with this information, except I, did my best as I could in the moment. But then when he walked out of the office, I just felt this heartache that the reason why he was excited, he told me, was because he'd finally have somebody that would love him. And I knew this young man's story a little bit, that his home life was such that he did not know or receive love on a regular basis. And so he went searching for it. And I felt this ache inside me, even at that moment. Like, I want to be a part of, I want to give my life toward helping people who feel hopeless find hope. And then just a short while thereafter, I just had an encounter with God where God changed the directory of my life. And shortly thereafter, probably 6 months later, I just knew that I wanted to work in the church. And that sounds like it was something I came up with. I deeply believe God put a passion within me that he invited me into something much bigger than myself. And at the same time, it was something that I've always wanted, was to be a part of something where those less fortunate, those who are broken, those who are hurting find hope and life and joy. And so I jumped into this thing called ministry. I was actually, well, midway through my college career, going to be a teacher. And when I knew I was going to follow God into ministry, I got just a math degree or a history degree with a math minor. And I went to graduate school right away because I just needed training. I hadn't really read the Bible before. And so all of it just became this explosion of information and experience, trying to get trained to follow this call of God to help people find hope when they feel hopeless. So that was the beginning of my journey. So for 24 years, I've been pastoring for a full-time basis, and 5 or 6 years before then, and part-time and often unpaid ways before then too. It's been quite a journey.
It sounds like you've enjoyed the journey. I saw a little smile on your face.
I believe that when you follow God's trajectory, there's joy, right? And I tell you, it's not circumstantial because, man, pastoring's hard. We can talk about that later. Like there's some hard parts of it, but man, the joy of the Lord is present when you are doing what he wants you to do. And in and through all of it, pastoring is also incredible. It's a sacred privilege to be invited into people's lives in whatever way they invite me. It's this holy encounter. It's messy, it's hard, it's beautiful. And yet when you see people come alive in ways that I did when God got a hold of my life, there's nothing like it.
I love the positive attitude. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Would you say that when you heard that young person, that young dad telling his story, how old were you?
I was 20, maybe 19 or 20.
Okay. And you were going through college at that time, right?
Yes.
Okay. Would you say that's when you heard the call?
I heard, no, an ache happened. I heard someone say, like, your vocation begins where, like, your giftedness and the world's need meet. I would not have been able to say that I have any gifts for that, especially at that time. But the heartache happened then. And then about a year and a half after that is when I felt God say, I'm inviting you to be used by me to make a difference in people's lives like that. And again, it's all God's work. Pastoring is something bigger than any human. So it's got to be God working through you. But it was an invitation. So about a year and a half later, I was in a church service, and I don't know who was preaching, what they were saying, but they gave an invitation. They said, I believe someone here is supposed to be in ministry. And I knew they were talking about me. And so I asked to be prayed for. And the pastor is like, well, I was waiting for you. I knew this day would come. Like, the pastor had seen gifts in me that I didn't see in myself. So I responded with the little bit of courage I had, and God has used that.
I love this story. It's very uplifting. For anybody who's listening to this who might be 19 to 22 years old and sees a little bit of themselves in your story, what advice do you have for young people who are interested in becoming a pastor too?
Ooh, you're going to get me emotional. The Lord is faithful. Don't deny the heartache or the passion. The worst thing I think anyone could do is to try to meet that heartache and passion, though, with illegitimate ways. Like, don't try to numb it. Don't try to satisfy that with anything false. Just to start serving in a place, just try. I mean, the Lord doesn't need your giftedness. He needs your availability. So go to your pastor and just say, I think I might want to do something for the Lord that's bigger than myself. And clean toilets, if that's where it begins. Because if you're going to follow Jesus, you've got to be a servant anyway. But don't let that heartache die. Just pray. Ask God, did you give me this passion? And what am I supposed to do with it? He will direct you, he will guide you. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, as far as young people, sometimes they don't know the path. So, what was your path? You said you started off in education and then you changed
Mhm.
to becoming a pastor. What's the educational pathway for a pastor like?
Every denomination has its own qualifications of its clergy. Generally, there's some kind of formal education, but not always. I'd say it first always begins with character. They want to see that you have the character of a Christian leader, and that's developed through the servant heart, through experience in the church, serving people. But education-wise, in our denomination, and I'm in a Methodist tribe, they've always valued education as part of clergy training. There's two paths. You can pursue formal education in our denomination, like a formal degree program. You can get a master's in a biblical field, biblical studies, ministry. The formal degree is often called the Masters of Divinity, and it walks you through Bible and theology, church history, and then practical ministry. Or for those for whom they don't want to get a degree, or it's not affordable, or they don't have the education background, there's usually alternate routes too, where you end up with a certificate or their hands-on training that you just work through while you're in ministry still. So for me, because I felt ill-equipped, I got my bachelor's in history, and then I went and got I got a master's in youth ministry, because I thought I'd work with teenagers all my life. But the Lord just said, hey, I found myself running into a brick wall when teenagers would come alive in their faith and they would go home and their parents who weren't alive in their faith would squelch it. And so again, I felt an invitation from the Lord to think beyond how I had limited his call, that what if I could work with big kids, just like I did with teenagers. So I got a Master's of Divinity. And then after I told God, I'm done, I don't want to do this ever again, the Lord in his infinite humor, I got to work at a seminary for a while, and they required me to get a doctorate. So I got a doctorate of ministry and looking at clergy burnout and clergy sustainability. That's not the normal path. You just get equipped, find a mentor, let them equip you, check with your denomination for what they require, and trust that those requirements are there for a reason, because they believe that will form the character of Jesus in you for the work that God's calling you to do.
That is quite a journey.
Uh-huh.
I've heard that God equips the called. He doesn't necessarily
Yes.
call the equipped. What's
Yeah,
your take on that?
that's my life. Yes, I believe that is true. And I will also say, I know scripture tells us before we were formed in the womb, God knew us. And so I believe that there's something within us that will come alive when we obey too. So yes, I don't have the equipping to do what God's called me to do on my own. That's all the work of God's Spirit in my life. But I'm finding that the more I follow God, the more it satisfies my deepest longings. So I was made for this, and yet, oh my goodness, I'm not equipped for this. And almost every story in scripture of somebody called into obedience to God, they all said the same thing, like, you got the wrong person. And I think that's almost essential, because, a pastor is one who helps connect, shepherd people. That's the best metaphor for me, is a shepherd of God's people. That's a sacred task, and you don't want to enter into that lightly. So it's got to be God's equipping, because it's something bigger than me.
I appreciate you going into that and sharing your own experience and how you didn't necessarily feel like you were totally equipped, but you keep getting equipped as you go through your career.
Yeah, well, one of the foundational Christian prayers just came. I read it right out of Scripture. Some know it as the Lord's Prayer, or Our Father in the Catholic tradition, and it says, "Give us today our daily bread." Think back to the story of the Israelites. Like, after he set them free, he fed them with daily bread, manna and quail, and it spoiled by the start of the next day. So they can't hoard it. They can't like backlog it in the pantry. You had to trust God for what you needed in that day. And I have found that in every calling, whether it's into vocational ministry or anyone who chooses to follow God, he gives you what you need for that moment, because we're learning to trust God. And I learned that best by seeking him for daily provision. Not what I want is a storehouse of everything, but God is faithful to give me what I need in the moment.
Right. And I've heard that there's a country song, something about thank God for unanswered prayers or something like that. Have you heard of this song?
I don't want to admit that I have, because I really don't like country music, which might turn listeners off immediately. But that's Garth Brooks. And there was a season pre-Jesus that karaoke was part of my life. And that was a song that was sung maybe once or twice. Yes.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to those lyrics. There are some prayers that are best left unanswered, for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me about your history as a pastor.
I've been in Ohio serving as a pastor for the entire time I've been married, which is almost 23 years. Yeah, so not 24, 23 years. And we served in Sydney, Ohio. We served in Lewisburg, Ohio. We served in Dayton, Ohio. And now we're up here in Perrysburg for the last almost 6 years. So before then, I served at a small church in Kentucky, but I grew up in Flint, Michigan. And that's where my faith foundations and my ministry volunteering began. So I served as a youth pastor and then a teaching pastor. And then mostly I've been a senior pastor in churches. But one of the weird parts of my journey is for 5 years, the denomination had me go teach at one of our seminaries. And I taught practical theology, practical ministry stuff. And I was the pastor to the seminary students for 5 years. And that was a great honor and joy just for that season.
Thank you for sharing your experience. That's really interesting to me. I wasn't sure where in the world you were from and where you came from, before here.
Yeah.
You're just Caleb's dad.
Yeah, that's right. Caleb's dad grew up in Flint, Michigan, and love it. I grew up there most of my life, went to college up there, and then when I went to graduate school, went to Kentucky, and then I've been in Ohio for all of our married life. So Ohio is home to our family. And again, we've been privileged to we were appointed up here in our denomination. The bishop appoints pastors to churches. And 5.5 years ago was asked to come up to Grace Church in Perrysburg. So we've been up here. It'll be 6 years in July.
I was wondering if you were called by the church. I didn't know if they had a call committee or if you were, assigned. It sounds like you were assigned, right?
Yeah, assigned. Yeah, there's some collaboration a part of it, and even more so now. But at that time, we were assigned to come up here.
At the time that you came to Perrysburg, you were not the senior pastor, correct?
I was coming from the seminary. So correct. I was the dean of the chapel. But no, I came to Perrysburg as the senior pastor of Grace Church.
Okay, I wasn't sure
Yes.
because I knew there was a woman named Grace who was also a pastor there. So what was the relationship there?
Yeah, she was the associate pastor at the time. She had been here 3 years prior to me, and she served with the previous senior pastor. So her role at the church was associate for about 8 years, and she just relocated about a year ago.
Got it.
Yeah.
One thing that the audience won't know, because they don't know this about my son Derek, is that your son Caleb invited my son Derek, who's a Lutheran, to go on some mission trips. And I remember standing in a circle before all the vans took off, and Grace led us in prayer, and I thought that was really nice. So I did meet her. I liked her, and I hope she's doing well.
Yep, she is. She's great.
Awesome. Well, at this time, how about we talk about some of the things that go on at your church? I know you have worship services. Let's start there. When are worship services?
We have 2 worship services every weekend. We have a traditional service at 8:30 that meets in our sanctuary. And we're privileged with a pretty large facility, but it does mean that we put some steps in on Sunday morning. Sanctuaries at one end of the facility. And then at 10:30, we have a contemporary service that meets in a multi-purpose space called the Family Life Center. And there we have a full band. And yeah, we transform a, if you will, gymnasium into a worship space every Sunday for that. They're beautiful services. They're very distinct. The traditional service has a choir, and the organ has more moments of silence and just sacred, holy space. And then the contemporary service has much more modern music, but still the same love for the Lord, same hunger to be a strong community together. And yeah, very thankful that we have both to be a gift to the community.
Very nice. And how about Sunday school? Is that part of your Sunday as well?
No, we have classes and life groups that meet throughout the week. So there's some that do meet on Sunday, but occasionally we'll have a Sunday class that will be offered in between the services. But we have, I think last I counted them, we have like 11 Bible studies and about the same number of life groups, small groups that meet throughout the week. And then Wednesday night is a big night for the church, kind of during the academic year. So September through April. On Wednesday nights, we do something called Meet and Grow, and we start with a community meal. It's just free, 5:30 to 6:15, to share food and hang out together and get to know people. And then from 6:15 to 7:30, we have age-appropriate groups or studies, or sometimes we stay all together and have an all-church Bible study or equipping session. But those happen on Wednesday nights through the academic year. One of the big gifts to both our church and the community is we have a women's Bible study on Thursdays called Grounded, and it's from 9:30 to 11:30. And there are women who come from all over, from a whole bunch of churches, and they eat together. You'll see a common theme there. They worship together. They'll have a teaching, and then they break off into small groups to process and to pray for each other. And it has been a vibrant part of the Perrysburg community for many years. And the people, I meet different women there every single week. It's a great community.
If I'm not mistaken, your parking lot gets pretty full on a Thursday morning around the time of that women's Bible study.
It does. It does. It's crazy. And then, it's not the only thing happening. We have an active preschool. Again, one of the things I was told when I came here 5.5 years ago was, we talked about our missions, which we can bring up later. They talked about Bible and Bible studies, and that I better preach from the Bible. I found all that to be true. They told us about the preschool. And Grace Preschool had a strong reputation in the community, and I have found it to be absolutely true that they not only prepare these kids academically to be ready, but there's a heart that we want to make sure they know that God loves them and that God is working in their life long before they can even understand that. And so it's a great program that's here Monday through Thursday for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and whatever they call 5-year-olds that aren't yet in preschool, right? Or aren't yet in kindergarten. It's a strong program. So that building is packed on Thursday mornings for sure.
That is definitely one of the preschool programs we looked at. Gosh, it would have been 15 years ago when Derek was looking to enter preschool. We ended up at First United Methodist because it came so highly recommended, by, my mom's group, basically, that I had joined.
Yeah.
But you guys were close second, so I just want you to know.
Oh, that's all right. As long as we're in the top 5, I'm good.
Oh.
No. I know First Church, great leaders, great church. I love them to death. You probably heard it. I have a pretty expansive view of what the church is, and we need all the churches to be strong. So I'm glad that there are people utilizing the different churches for their needs.
When I did the first episode in this series, and I was just talking about places of worship in Perrysburg, it seems like I've been in just about every church in Perrysburg, with the exception of there's a Lutheran church on Roachton Road. It's a Missouri Synod church. I would like to talk to that pastor because I've just never connected with them. I've never been in that church. This series gives me an opportunity to connect with more worship leaders. But you, sir, are part of something called a ministerium, right? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, there's a group of pastors. I think I've tried to email everyone, but there's a group of probably 10 to 12 pastors that meet monthly. for support and community. And I started leading that group about 3 years ago. And so we meet at one of the churches and we just share with each other what's going on in our lives. But a couple of years ago, we did start asking the question, how can we be a blessing to the community? And one of the things that group had done historically, and that group existed long before me, but I was just asked to lead for a little bit. But they had always done a Good Friday service. And so we kind of relaunched that a couple of years ago and did it downtown at the Commodore Lawn. This year we went inside because we were worried about it being cold. And then we did a back to school just rally, just to pray for our teachers and bus drivers and parents and kids before the school started. And we did that right on the Commodore Lawn again, because we can all go to Oh Deer afterward and get some ice cream. A great group of pastors who just have the same heart. You believe it or not, it's hard to get pastors together sometimes because of we do have distinctiveness, right? That isn't a bad thing, but our different faith tribes are different. At times that has kept churches and pastors away from each other. But I'm just so proud of this group that is doing the hard work of coming together and praying for each other and supporting each other as often as we do. And there's always room to grow, but man, I'm just thankful for it.
That sounds excellent. I think having an open line of communication can only lead to good things, more good things.
Yeah. Because again, I want people to be at a church where they are going to give themselves to the work of the church and receive from the church, right? It's a body. And so you have something to offer and you need to receive. It's both. And so if Grace Church isn't that for our people, it's nice to be able to know other pastors to say, hey, from what you've told me that is where you are, here's a church I'd recommend to you. Here's a pastor that is leading that church. So I'm grateful to know people that I can actually point people to.
Yeah, I like the referral angle that you just talked about, referring somebody to the faith community that they will ultimately belong to. It can't be a bad thing, even if they don't end up at your church.
The kingdom is much bigger than any one particular tribe, right? So I try to be generous. Now, all of us are fallible and get our feelings hurt at times, but on a good day, I try to be generous with those who are earnestly seeking to follow God.
I like it. Let's talk a little bit more about what happens in your building and outside of it. I think one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about the ministerium group was that Perrysburg Christians United has that food pantry right there on your property. Does that have anything to do with the ministerium group, or is that just all of the churches in Perrysburg gathering together?
It's the latter. The ministerium group supports it, but it existed, I think, probably before the ministerium group. PCU is an incredible outreach to the community that we just happen to have it on our property, but it is the work of the community. There's churches from all over and organizations that contribute to that. So it is not Grace Church's thing. It just is using a building on the back end of our property. But we're grateful for that. We're grateful to just be a host. And also we consider them one of our core mission partners. So our people are serving there and they're giving to that regularly. And yeah, it is a vital ministry in the community.
Yep, I've been in it, and I took a picture of the group once, and everybody's happy to be there, and they know exactly where the stuff goes. And I think it's very interesting that you can just donate money to, and they buy in bulk with certain things, or at least they used to prior to the pandemic. So they don't just accept food. Anybody listening, if you would like to donate to PCU, they accept cash too.
And they have taken on even more of that in the recent years, like more than food. There are people that come in that they become not just their clients, but they want to resource them. And so they've helped with rent assistance and utility assistance. And so, yes, food is needed, donations are needed, and the churches help support them in that as well.
Great. I'm glad you talked about that. I had no idea they helped with rent assistance, among other things. I think that's like them seeing a gap and filling it. You got to be a gap filler.
Yeah. From PCU, our church years ago started something called Food for Your Soul. And it's one Friday a month, just a full big breakfast, because we saw the need at PCU and elsewhere that there were undernourished people in Perrysburg and in the surrounding community. And so once a month, our people just donate awesome food. It's not just, it's like a big breakfast. And then we often have handouts for people to go too, of food they can take with them. Again, it was a need that was created. And because of our exposure through PCU and other places, some real servants of the church stepped up and provide that meal for the community too. I think it's the third Friday of the month. It's like 8 a.m. over in our Family Life Center, kind of the big community space where we can host a lot of different events.
Thank you. And if somebody is listening to this and they didn't have a chance to write it down, is that somewhere on your website?
I think so. If you go to, gracegmc.net, which will take you to gracechurchperrysburg.com, but gracegmc.net is a little easier to remember. I believe under the missions link, you'll see that and more. Because as I shared with you earlier, I love this church. We have people that want to love the Lord and they want to give more and more of themselves away. So one of the things that I think is distinct about our church is I believe God uses real people who are available and willing everywhere they go. So we try not to over program. Not that programming is bad, but I want the people of Grace Church to be loving their neighbors. And if they're at church all the time, they're not going to have opportunities to build relationships with their neighbors. They're not going to have a chance to coach Little League. They're not going to have a chance to sit on boards where they're influencers if they're here all the time. But we believe that God works through them in their places where they live, in their homes, their jobs. And that's then the heart of this church. Like they want to empower people to make a real difference in lives. So we've got 12 mission partners all over the world. PCU is one of them. We support a place called Deb House in Romania that has rescued women from trafficking. And they give them hope. And some of these women are now teaching in the program for the younger women that are coming in. MIA, which I know Pastor Mark talked about in his podcast, right down in Haiti, the Brad Reddick School, named after one of our faithful members of the church who went to be with the Lord far too early. Those are just two of our partners. But then locally, we support 3 or 4 different organizations in Toledo. And we don't believe we have the luxury of saying where we can't go or serve, because the gospel calls us to go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. It's not either or, it's all the above. If we could give it all away and still function as a body here, we would do so.
I know what you mean by giving away things. It doesn't just make you feel good. I think we're all called to share our time, treasure, and talents. And that treasure thing
Yeah.
is sometimes one that people struggle with. I read an article a while back. I think it was when Pastor Chuck Campbell was at Lutheran Church of the Master. And it said, how much does God want you to give to the church or something like that? And I think it had a picture of a limo on it and somebody in a suit. And a lot of people, they just don't know how much to give and how much to let themselves enjoy. There's almost like this guilt. I got to admit it. And anybody listening to this, if you feel this way too, you're not alone. So what is the right way to give of your time, talent, and treasures so that you give enough, but then you also have enough for yourself?
Yeah. Now you're talking to someone who was raised very frugally. And that's my default. But I believe one of the gifts the Spirit of God has given me is one of generosity. I heard someone say years ago that you cannot outgive God. I want to provide a helpful threshold for somebody if they were to ask me that question. But I think the real answer is, instead of asking God, how much should I give you? If it all belongs to God and it has come through the hand of God, nurtured through our stewarding of it and our using our gifts, right? But like even the ability to make money, Scripture tells you, is a gift from God. So maybe the question to ask is, God, how much should I keep? I've never seen God not prove faithful when he prompts you to give sacrificially, because that's his character and nature. God is generous, God is sacrificial. And I believe all that we need to not solve the world's problems, because that's way too, I can't say that legitimately, but I think all that we need to do what God asks us to do is in the hands of his people already. And just in scripture, right, the parable of the talents, he's given it to people. Sometimes we want to bury it, and sometimes we're scared, right? That's the one servant in that story was scared that he'd screw it up. And so he just buried it. And that was the worst criticism that came from God, was, you should have done something. Right? God invites us to partner with him. And so whenever we give of our time, what a gift, time, right? If you sat down and just listened to people's stories, that's a huge gift we could offer in our over busy world. If you gave someone an hour and just listened to their story, man, God invites us to participate with his reshaping of this world. And we do so through those means. What an invitation that he gave us. So I want to grow in how much I give away toward that the rest of my life. That probably wasn't very helpful for someone just starting, but just ask God, just to say, God, what should I give? What should I keep? And help me to trust you.
I like that answer the best, those last words there. I think everybody's got a different personality, right? And some people take stuff super
Absolutely.
literally. I'm one of those people that takes stuff super literally. So I'm scanning this article, right, that Pastor Chuck gave us a while ago. And I'm thinking, like, what are the parameters? What are the specifications? I'm a medical person. We're always looking for the formula and everything. So
yes.
I like your idea of praying about it and then doing what God tells you. It's just as simple as that.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And God will be faithful. He's inviting us into the life Jesus called the abundant life. And it looks different than the life in which we're often exposed to. And it will take trust. Like I mentioned, I did my doctorate on clergy burnout. One of the things I had to explore was pastors are not really good at drawing boundaries and overexerting ourselves. And in scripture, one of the gifts of that was Sabbath. God instituted Sabbath for his people early on. We think it's like this old archaic thing, but oh my goodness, what trust and faith it must have taken for the people to stop working and to say, God, we're going to trust you, that if we stop, the world's not going to fall apart. And so I believe when you step into the rhythm of God in life, when you step into the generosity of God, it will always still require trust. God, will you show up if I give more than I think I could?
That's a very interesting thought.
I preach too much, Kim. You just need to shut me up, because that's the fun stuff. I love watching people come alive with principles of God, because I find it to be that which engaged me when I was far away from God. Could I be free? Could I be loved? Could I give my life to something that really matters? And when I get a chance to talk about it, I probably get a little too excited.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. No apology needed. I was once warned by a friend of mine who is a pastor, Pastor Jeffrey Bischoff, and he said, if you give a pastor a microphone, he will preach.
I hope what I hope gets translated though with this, and that's always the caution, is I'm actually an introvert, first of all. I get refueled being by myself.
I didn't know that.
But I don't want my passion to come across as like the religious, like I have to say this. This is what I deeply believe is the hope for our world, is if our churches can come alive. And if our churches come alive, it means we've been able to connect with people who are far from God and help them see God's perfect plan for their life. And so it's not my religious duty to tell you or to preach. I deeply believe that the abundant life that is found in Jesus is the only way to live, and everything else is a cheap substitute.
I think you're preaching in a good way, just for clarification. So just in case anybody thinks I did a backhanded slap. If you give a pastor a microphone, they have something to say. That's what I meant.
Probably true.
And you have good words to share. I think this whole conversation will help whoever listens to it decide if Grace Church Perrysburg might be right for them. And In thinking about that, maybe there's somebody who's brand new to town or has been living here and needs to find a church home. Can you explain why is Grace Church Perrysburg a good church home?
It's a family-centered church, meaning all generations find a home here, and they pride themselves on ministering to all generations. Last year, for instance, we started 2 new ministries. One called Refresh, which is a ministry to widows and widowers. And at the same time, we started a ministry called Gideon, which is a ministry with and for young adults, 20 to 30 somethings. And they've actually served together at times, but we don't want to lose any generation. So we have a vibrant kids ministry and youth ministry. I will say, I think the perception of Grace Church that makes us distinct is there's a lot of depth here. And we've had people come to the church who are looking to explore an authentic Christianity and one that can handle real life. And I don't know how much of a distinctive that is, but I do see it in people. They're hungry to know and to know more. So our sermons tend to expose people to real life questions, to go right through Scripture. But the whole family should be here. Kids, we have VBS coming up June 17th through the 21st. It's packed full of kids from preschool to 6th grade, right? And then, we have a men's and women's retreat because we believe, again, all generations need to have encounters with God on a regular basis. So I could go into more details, but I think if you're hungry for a real relationship with God, or you've hit a space in your Christian journey where you want to know if there's more, we are exploring what it means to be filled with the Spirit and to let the Spirit of God lead us and guide. And we want families here and all generations. So, yeah. So Grace Church might be right for you.
Thank you. Excellent pitch, Pastor Dan.
Yeah, no, I believe it. I think it's because I have served different churches, and we have a DNA, right? Each church has a thread of God's faithfulness. This church has had people who want to know the Lord deeply, who want to serve and give their life away to others. And I don't want to entertain anybody. If you're looking for entertainment and you're looking for someone to put on a show, and I don't say any church is doing that intentionally, but we want participants who want to engage this life in Christ and are willing to dive into it together in relationship with other people in the church.
Excellent explanation. What's the first step if somebody's never been to your church before and they want to take that first step?
I encourage you to come to worship. Again, 8:30 or 10:30 on the weekends, or the meet and grow on the Wednesday nights, because it's casual and there's a couple of groups there on Wednesday night that are drop-in groups. So if you come one week and you don't come the next, it's okay. You won't miss out on anything. They're often doing topical studies that are entry points for people. But worship's a good space because we're big enough where you can come in and just be present and not have to reveal even who you are. But we're small enough where we'll notice you. Yeah, we'll see you. And when you're ready to tell us you're there, we'll be ready to receive you.
That is a very welcoming message, and I really like that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Everybody needs an entry point. In the beginning, I believe we were talking about some of the challenges of being a pastor. So I'm not trying to go negative on you, but I want to welcome you to talk about your favorite parts of being a pastor, but also some of the challenges, because when people are church shopping, they want to know who their leader is. So let's hear it.
I don't think this is negative. I think it's just reality. I love sitting with people who are asking real questions at every stage of faith, from someone who doesn't believe in God to someone who just retired and is wondering if they have any value now that they're not working, right? Those points of human vulnerability are places that I'm just always honored to be invited into. So I know as a parishioner, it's always hard to tell your pastor when you're hurting or sick. I'll tell you from your pastor's perspective, when you let us into that vulnerable space, it is always an honor. It feels like we're walking on sacred ground. Even funerals, when we get to really minister to a family, because I think God cares and he sees them in those vulnerable moments. And we get to be an inadequate, but a willing vessel to be there on behalf of God, just to say, God sees you in this time of hurting. We're here with you. That's the best part. And when you just know you're in the presence of God in community, oh my goodness, I could live there. David, right? He said, better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. When you know you're in the presence of God with people who are seeking God, whew, that's awesome. The hardest parts, I heard somewhere once that most people have 10 to 12, I hope I get this right. Most people will experience, let's just say 10 difficult deaths in their life. Most pastors experience that every year. And yes, they may not be our family members that have passed away, and I don't want to conflate that because it is different than having your mom or dad pass away. But we carry with us that grief and that loss in the same way when people leave a church for good or bad reasons. Like, you can't just do this. Well, you can be a pastor and be removed from people, but I think that's not the incarnational way. I think Jesus modeled, we are flesh and blood. So I think those moments are hard. And if we're not careful, can be really taxing. I think the second part is always managing expectations. Every church I've been in is better than I've deserved, right? And the people there are always unique, and everyone has expectations of the pastor, of the pastor's family sometimes. And again, I'm blessed to be at the church I'm at. But again, every church has a set of those expectations. And so walking through that and trying to manage that, I am a dad of now 2 teenagers at home and 1 college student. And we've seen how pastors years and years ago surrendered their family for ministry. And I am unwilling to do that. But that makes it hard at times because I have a love for what I do and I have a love for my family, and those things sometimes conflict. But again, I got a great church that walks me through that and walks through that with me. But yeah, I think those are it. When you don't have time to walk through your own grief and loss of the little and the big moments, those are hard. And then just managing expectations from the church, from the community, from your family, from yourself, all of it.
I like managing expectations as a topic. When we called our pastor, Pastor Mark Wentz at the Lutheran Church of the Master, there was this section on our ministry site profile, as we call it.
Yeah.
And the section was called Mutual Expectations or something like that. And I remember checking boxes, and it's interesting. Life's not as simple as checking a box, but if there's not a discussion about what you as a pastor need and what the church needs and discussing it in advance, there could be problems down the road. So I appreciate that you have boundaries and you're talking about them.
Yeah, and so does the church, right? And so there's, we're in this together. So you have to talk through those things. And you usually don't know you have an expectation until it's not met, right? Not just in church, but in, marriage and with your kids. And you're like, what happened? Why didn't you do this or say this? Well, I didn't know I was supposed to. So I think that's the good, holy work of the church behind the scenes, is just talking through that together, working through it, finding ways to honor one another in the midst of that. And it's God's church. God will raise up people that are needed for those gaps. It takes some faith and trust, but God is faithful.
Yes, indeed. As we start to wrap this up, I can't leave this interview until I ask you about missions. I know my son has experienced mission trips with Grace Church, Perrysburg, but can you, for anybody in the community that might be listening to this who has youth and might be interested in these mission trips, I would love to give you a chance to talk about that.
Well, first off, I married a missionary kid. My wife grew up overseas. Her mom and dad planted churches. I married into a perspective that's greater than just one community. And growing up in Flint, I have seen places in the world, in our local communities, that need just as much help as places around the world. And so I believe mission experiences, their primary function is actually to disciple us to come back and see our world differently. So the greatest gift, I just went to Tijuana, Mexico with a crew of 16, and we served at an orphanage. But the real fruit of that trip happens when you come back home and you see yourself, your stuff, your community differently. But God uses those experiences to open your eyes to a world that, wouldn't it be great if, Derek or any teenager that had gone, I think we're going to Eastern Kentucky this year and they'll go to Tijuana next year, but to go off and study to be an engineer and learn how to use their engineering gifts to solve a problem in sub-Saharan Africa because they saw a part of the world they had never been exposed to before. Again, yes, there's just as many needs here in our town, but again, it's not either or, it's both and. Our junior high in the summer in July, they do a week of missions and they go local. So they meet at the church and they do something different every single day in our local community. Those are things I think it's just the heart of Jesus. If there's a need and one that he calls you to step into, then you go.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know that Derek has encountered your youth leader, Kelly. So can you talk a little bit about Kelly and who leads these missions? Do you go on them?
Yeah.
Or is it a team? What's it like?
Yeah, we have a team, a missions committee that helps us stay connected to our mission partners, but also they encourage the church to serve. Our kids ministry is led by Hannah Allison. And if they are serving, Hannah's leading it and putting a team together. Our teenagers, which is 7th through 12th grade, is led by Kelly. And Kelly, if they're serving, Kelly and her team is coordinating that. I go on the ones where either I'm introducing a new mission to somebody, or they need help, or I have space in my life where I can do that. Or sometimes I've been privileged to be able to go with my kids because they invite me to come. And when your kid invites you to come, you come. So yeah, we have teams that lead all those.
Very good. I know working with teenagers can be a challenge at times, but I feel like Kelly really loves what she does.
She loves people in general, but she loves teenagers, right? I think that, when I started in youth ministry, there is something special about teenagers because of their identity formation that's taking place. And if you can intersect with them at that age, that critical age where they're learning who they are, if you can be an example or a safe place for them to explore who they are in the environment of Christ, then it's good, holy work. It's hard, it's squirrely, it's messy, but man, their enthusiasm and joy is life-giving.
I like working with teenagers, and I like what you just said, where they're squirrely and they're sometimes messy, but they can say a lot with their voices. Like, what they're thinking about or how they're feeling by the way they say it. There's just so much that you can extract from a teenager if you know what you're looking for. And I think Kelly knows. Speaking of youth, do you still have a youth group?
Yeah, we do. They meet formally on Wednesdays during that meet and grow time. But we've partnered last year with Young Life. And so Young Life meets in our barn, which is a structure it's on our property. It's a 3-season room that they meet in 4 seasons. And they have this awesome group on Monday night called Club. That's for high schoolers. And then junior high meets at a home on Tuesday nights. That's called Wildlife. But then on Wednesdays at our meet and grow, we have our group. And then there's a Young Life Bible study after that too. So we partner with them because they're doing incredible work in the community. And again, we want to be open-handed to say, where's God at work? And we want to join them.
Yes, I love that you give a place for teenagers to meet up and grow in their faith. And then you guys have Woodlands Park right next door, right?
Yes. If you're listening to this and you want to teach me how to better play disc golf, I would be all ears. I love to play, but I need some help. So I'd love to go out there with you. It's a great excuse to go play.
Nice. Maybe the youth can take you out there and school you. I don't know.
They already have. So I'm looking for some new. My pride can only handle so much. So no, I would love to go play with somebody. If you're listening to this, just call the church. We'll schedule a time.
Very nice. Well, Pastor Dan, this has been such a great interview. As we wrap this up, is there anything else you'd like to share about Grace Church?
I deeply believe Grace Church is on the edge of some real breakthroughs. Not that we're not at a good spot. We're in an awesome spot, and God is really alive and doing some new things here. But there has been a hunger for more of God here for decades, and it seems to be culminating. And so if you have a hunger for more of God and you want to come explore what that would look like, I invite you to come out. If Grace Church can bless you by praying for you to be more active and present at your church, my goodness, what an honor it would be to bless you, because we're in this together and we need you to go hard after God and he will meet you and be faithful to you. I'm not sure I talked about Grace Church there, but that's my heart.
Thank you for sharing that. I think anybody who's a prospective, new, or current Perrysburg, Ohio resident can hear your heart and hear the invitation to come and see over at Grace Church. And maybe that will become their new church home when they arrive in town, or maybe they'll switch. Who knows? They will follow their own call to Grace Church if that's what's meant to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pastor Dan, it has been great getting to know you more. I knew you as a parent before, but now I feel like I know the Pastor Dan side of things instead of just Dan. So this has been wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here on the Perrysburg podcast. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Pastor Dan Gildner for being my guest today on the Perrysburg podcast. As he said toward the end of the interview, God is really alive and doing some new things at Grace Church Perrysburg. If you are a prospective, new, or current Perrysburg, Ohio resident and you're looking for your church home, consider Grace Church. Again, the worship services are Sundays at 8:30 and 10:30 a.m. This has been episode 40 of the Perrysburg podcast. Please visit perrysburgpodcast.com to read the show notes. In the show notes, you'll find Grace Church Perrysburg's website and social media links, a link to PCU Food Pantry, where there is a tab that you can click on to donate to PCU. You'll also find my email address, just in case you want to nominate a guest for this series or nominate yourself, the link to sign up for the newsletter, the weekly newsletter for the podcast, and more. Lots of links today. Everything you need is on perrysburgpodcast.com. And by the way, if you find this episode in July of 2024, please reach out to Pastor Dan and congratulate him on 6 years with Grace Church. Congratulations, Dan. If you know someone who might like this episode, please share it with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Perrysburg podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Thanks for listening today. I'll talk to you next Friday.